Welcome to API's You Won't Hate podcast. We're recording this today, July 23rd, still in the middle of an awesome pandemic. Phil, Mike, how's it going?
Hey, what's up, Matt? How are you?
I am living my best quarantine life. How about you?
Yes, still alive, still alive. Every day feels the same, but I'm
Okay.
trying to stay positive and help people where I can.
Ah.
And Phil, you almost got killed again.
Yeah, well, which time? Today on the way rushing for the podcast, I was running a little bit late and I decided to jump on my girlfriend's single speed Dutch bike. It's like one of those pedal brakes, which I hate, and going way too fast. Nearly crashed into a few people nearly crashed into me, nearly dented a rather nice silver Lamborghini that shouldn't have been on that narrow road. Mostly because I forget how brakes work. Pedal brakes are hard. But made it here, and I'm excited to talk to you guys. Full of adrenaline.
Yeah, it's been a bit since the three of
I
us
can
have
tell
been
you're
on
kind of
together.
all over the place with like your
Yeah.
yeah. And meanwhile, Mike and I are still like, it's like 8 a.m. here. We're still waking up.
Yeah.
All right, so we have two really fun topics we want to get to. First is that we want to talk about Stoplight and what all is going on there. They've been pushing out some great updates with Studio, as well as Spectral Prism, things like that. And I think there's some cool, fun things in the workshop. I finally got to play with Stoplight Studio. We had a meeting with Phil, 2 weeks ago? But it felt like 3 months ago,
Yeah.
something like that.
Time doesn't exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. But I mean, Studio has just made our job so much easier, spanning 3 different countries full of teams. So what all is new going on there?
So some of the new stuff, I think I mentioned on podcasts before that there's been a few different generations of Stoplight. There was Stoplight Classic and then Stoplight Next, which is awkwardly the last version. And now we've kind of got this new ecosystem out. And we've been talking about the editor, which is Studio. And there's these few kind of floaty tools that we integrate with Studio, Spectral and Prism. But there's also this other concept, which we call platform, which is more of a software as a service, and it's only been available for enterprise users so far. So it gives you all these really cool features like a design library where you can create models and share them across different projects. So people aren't kind of recreating users and companies and flights and all these like common models that you might want to use in your company in different places. And a few other kind of features like that. And so for the longest time, they've been kind of hidden on the enterprise license. And if you want to pay, a whole bunch of money, you can get that. But for the average user who is used to kind of paying more like 10, 15, 20 bucks for various different bits of, software as a service, there's been kind of a gap. So you've had lots of stuff for free in Studio, and there's been free documentation and free everything else. And we actually used to get people asking us all the time, like, where's the pricing page? I'm like, it's just free. We're not hiding the pricing page. It literally is just free. But we've now released a bunch of new functionality with Stoplight platforms. So you can go to Stoplight and click on Getting Started at the top. You can select your own workspace, which makes things a bit nicer. You can, all of your projects, which are usually Git repos, you can put all of your projects together in this one workspace. And that could be for your team or for your entire company or whatever. And you also get the design library, and you also get the Explorer, which is pretty helpful. Problem I had at WeWork was, there's 50 different APIs going on. And even when people started to write open API docs for them, some would document them on README.io, and some would put docs on Stoplight, and some would put docs somewhere else. And it gets kind of hard to find where everything is. But with the Explorer, you can have multiple APIs, multiple projects in there, and you can search for stuff. So you can search by like description or API name or like the description field for a single property, and models and all that stuff will show up in the Explorer. So it gives you a lot of visibility into what people are building in various different parts of the company. So we've released a whole bunch of that stuff now. Pretty excited about it. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it's cool. I haven't had a chance to poke around with much of that, Phil, but I feel like I've had roughly 1 million opportunities over the past month or so to recommend people check out Stoplight. I feel like so contrary to you, I live much more on the front end side of the world, and that's sort of where I tend to hover and harass people on Twitter and whatnot. But I've seen a lot of people talking about like creating stub APIs and consuming APIs. And actually, one of the things that's come up a few times over the past couple of weeks is JSON schema and how to consume it. And as you and I have seen before, there's a lot of confusion about what that is and what it means. I was going through and explaining to someone that it wasn't a JSON schema, wasn't a schema of a database, like it's there's a lot of confusing nomenclature out there. But I think the tools that Stoplight build really need to get into the hands of these front end guys who would benefit from them tremendously. And it's cool to see a lot of the information going out lately. So I've become one of your biggest cheerleaders in terms of like just trying to get people to test it out and being able to say like, hey, go check out the pricing page. It is as good as it sounds,
Right. Now that we actually have really one helpful. Now.
Yeah, definitely.
The mocking thing is definitely something I want more people to kind of get into. I feel like there's this, or we might have talked about this on the podcast before, like interrupt me if we have, but I feel like there's this kind of awkward waterfall model that where the kind of front end developers end up being thought of last. And so, a bunch of requirements come in for, we need an API that can do this. And whoever thought of that idea in the first place could come from, front ends with requirement, could have come from other back-end teams just deciding they wanted to make a new API that, because monoliths are bad or whatever. But an API for some reason is being created and people just go and write a whole bunch of code. And then maybe once a prototype is available, they'll make that available to the consumers for a bit of feedback. But that's usually after a month's worth of coding has been done. Or people waste time like creating these mocks themselves, but it's usually the back end people making those mocks. And so I've seen this kind of, right, you've experienced that where people like create controllers with static arrays in there so that they can return this kind of static JSON, and that will just make a lot of cocking about.
Well, that's exactly what I'm seeing is it's the front end guys who are like saying, I know I'm going to get something that looks like an address or whatever, a flight information, like you said before, and they'll go in and waste a ton of time trying to figure out how to mock that up. And these are exactly the last people that should be doing it, because that's like squarely away from where their expertise is. Their time is better spent doing designy front-endy goodness. And instead they're writing test cases against APIs that don't yet exist that are like, oh no, you can really just go and click and drag this stuff in this interface and it'll do that for you.
And then
I've seen that too. I mean,
mocking, the object doesn't look anything like they thought it was going to be once.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. I mean, I've seen a lot of the back-end teams doing that because, a lot of the back-end teams are like the gatekeepers of all API things. They're like, here you go, I have blessed you with this JSON array, do with it as you will. And they kind of don't really get that much feedback. And a violent reaction to that, I feel like, has been the front-end people saying, I am working on this application. I am going to create and mock my own self. I think it's called Mock It is one popular one. It looks really good. This isn't an invalid use case, but I've seen a lot of front-end teams that will go and create a bunch of mocks themselves using Mock It or JSON server, or literally just creating random JSON files and saving them. And they'll say like, this is what I want. This is what my application needs. Please, can you make that into a backend? Or they'll go and make their own BFF and that will act as a gateway between them. And that, again, is a lot of work being involved. And potentially the front-end team aren't the best ones to be doing that, because one front-end team might have one set of requirements and create an API that suits their needs perfectly, but another team might have slightly different requirements. And while it's not always possible to make an API that works perfectly for every single client, you often can make something, an approximation that works pretty well for two of them, instead of making two totally separate things. So I feel like a lot of the time, front-end driven mocking has been done because the back-end teams don't listen enough, and creates a lot of churn because, different teams will say, I want this, and then I want this. And they're like, wow, you can have that. And you kind of just have these different mocks replacing each other all the time. And it's a bit silly. But if you have this kind of design first approach where you're all involved, the back end people can do it, the front end people can do it. You can have conversations around these simple API designs by clicking a few buttons, and you get YAML as a result that you can take anywhere and put in any mock system you want. Then you're wasting a lot less time, and you're able to have a conversation around a much more realistic thing. And once it's actually in Git, if someone changes it, then they did, because it's on Git blame. Like, Barry, why did you change that field? I needed that field. Why did you sneak that in there? So that's one of the things I'm excited about, people getting to use more. And hosted mocking is now a thing. Before you had to like download Studio in order to run a local mock or use the CLI, but now we've got hosted mocking up there. That kind of solves that for a lot of people. You can just give them a URL and they can just play around with it. So.
Right. And I think the important message there is that that can be shared easily. You know, the from a practical standpoint, the cost where this gets expensive even when the front end guys are figuring out how to write their own mocks and doing it successfully, the expensive part is when the two meet in the middle and suddenly you have a real back end and a front end that may or may not have a great understanding of that. And then there's like expensive turn where you have to rewrite parts of whatever to connect those two things together.
Right.
That's real dollars getting spent. And even if your front end guys are for some reason getting better at mocking APIs, it's not good. And when I used to do consulting when I used to do consulting at all, the quote we always used to bandy about was one from Frank Lloyd Wright, where he says something along the lines of the architect's most effective tools are the eraser in the drafting room and the wrecking bar at the job site. And it's kind of like, yeah, once you've built the thing, you've got to take a sledgehammer to it. And that costs real money to tear down walls and rebuild. But in advance, if you're able to start with a good drawing or a good understanding of what you're doing, like you're actually saving money by doing more design work up front. And whether that's design of the API or the interface itself, it helps to collaborate. And that's what Stoplight is enabling.
Right. And there's one other thing I wanted to shout about with Studio, because that's a lot of the platform changes, right? If you're using the SaaS, you've already got access to this. If you're using the kind of on-premise, you host it yourself, you'll get that in version 2, which should be out by the time this recording is aired. But for Studio desktop users, we've made things a little bit easier. Now to publish documentation, you don't have to click the publish button, which I always personally found to be a tad annoying, because we talked about this before in the kind of the design review process. I'll get to that in a sec. When somebody made a change, maybe they didn't have access to, probably edit this bit out. The publish button I always found really annoying, because if somebody sent a pull request and made a bunch of changes and then it was merged, you would then, you do that all in GitHub, and then you'd have to go over to Studio Web or Studio Desktop, pull those changes from master, and then click publish. You could set up a continuous integration. We'd give you this one command that you can run on CI, and it would use the Stoplight CLI to publish. But that's kind of an advanced move for some people. So the new approach, when you set up platform, if you're using the SaaS version, we have a bunch of integrations for GitHub, and I think there's GitLab and Bitbucket, and you can do the enterprise versions and everything else. If you're paying a certain amount, you can like set up your own configuration, so you can use your own credentials. So we don't ever really read any of your code, but by default you can use the built-in GitHub stuff. And when you authenticate the application with Stoplight, you can then start adding projects with like one click here and there. And you have the choice of adding webhooks, which means we get a little ping back from GitHub every single time a new branch is created, or a new push has happened, or whatever, commits are merged. And that means that we can automatically publish documentation. And I was surprised in how quick it was. I thought, that's a pretty cool bit of functionality. You click merge, and then within like 5 seconds, most of the time, your new documentation is completely up to date. So that's real handy. And a feature that we merged shortly afterwards was branch management, or like being able to track multiple branches. So once you've got that webhook stuff set up, you can, your default branch, if that's main or something else, that will publish. But again, if you pay a little bit extra money, you can set up a main and a develop branch. Or if you're doing branch-based versioning for your API, you might have like a V3 and a V4 branch, and you maintain those two separately. And you can track both of those, and you get a little drop down on the documentation screen being like, do you want to look at V3 or V4? And that stuff is really handy. I don't know of too many others that kind of support that flexibility of being able to show off kind of the stable version and then like the develop version or the nightly build, so you can share those separately,
Yeah, I've certainly encountered the mess that it can create when that doesn't exist.
Right.
I mean, that sounds really useful too. Like I ran into a problem with trying to manage branches and stoplights. So this whole stuff sounds really great coming out of the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, we had some problems before with publish, where like you click publish and wherever you are, that is now the case. So like if you're using some random branch, like some feature branch, and you click publish, great, you've just obliterated master, and now you have lies. So it was nice and convenient to have that publish button right there. It worked really well when like you were the developer, or you were the team. But as soon as you start getting into API design reviews, like we were chatting about in that other episode with Arno, that stuff can get a bit annoying. So now what's nice is you can even have unpublished branches. So the analyzer will run on any branch via webhooks, not just the ones that you set up to be tracked. So you can actually select an unpublished branch. So if you're working on a feature branch and you're adding a new endpoint or adding some new functionality, you can make a pull request and then add that kind of preview URL. I really want to just have that automatically happen, like Netlify, right? Where you just like make a pull request and it goes, boom, check it out. That's coming. But you can copy and paste that in manually, and then people can kind of look around the actual documentation instead of looking around like YAML in a pull request. So that's really handy as well. I'm really excited about Platform just because it gives us this great framework that we can start baking stuff in. Like having spectral rule sets automatically applied to the entire workspace. You create a custom one and then just enforce it across your entire workspace. And people that don't even know about what those rules are just like, oh shit, I better rename this to make it whatever, camel case, or I better stop using HTTP basic right now because my computer told me to. So that's going to get real fun.
Listen to the robots. They're smarter than you.
Exactly. Train the robots well.
Yeah.
Do your work.
So hey, are there any other upcoming features or things that you're excited about that are coming around the pike?
The shared style guides thing is cool. I'm really looking forward to, so Studio Desktop 2 doesn't have a lot of this workspace knowledge in it yet. Studio 2 is just about to come out, and I'm really looking forward to hooking Studio Desktop up to your workspace so that you can, open projects from your workspace and get that shared rule set and all that other stuff. But yeah, I actually forgot what some of the upcoming things are. Wait for it. Oh yeah, so creating pull requests from Studio is something I'm looking forward to. After having that conversation about API design reviews, I wrote the documentation for how to do design reviews in Stoplight. And in version 1, like the old SaaS and version 1 of desktop, it was like an 8-step process. It was like, do this, and then create a branch, and then publish it, and then go and find it, and then do this thing, and do this thing. And now it's down to like 6 steps, and having that automatically posting a URL would make it down to 5 steps. But one of the steps is still like, you've just pushed this branch. Now how do you create a pull request? You have to, remember whether it's in GitHub or Bitbucket. It could be in any of them, and then go and find it and then click the button and do all that. So I'm really looking forward to having, when you click push, it's like, cool, now do you want to make a pull request? And you never have to leave the Studio experience. And then theoretically, people that don't have GitHub access, because some of these people can just be generic users, just signed up by email or signed in with LDAP or SAML. Theoretically, you could have like pull requests created by the application that you've authenticated as. Instead of being done by me, it's being done by technical writer Sarah, who doesn't have a GitHub account. And that solves that problem. And then after that, of course, kind of API design reviews, where you can talk about the stuff instead of having to go and view that pull request and look for that little GitHub link. You can just kind of look in Platform and like discuss it right in there. So that stuff I think will be pretty fun. But yeah, there's loads of stuff on the roadmap. If you go to roadmap.stoplight.io, we're trying to focus what we work on based on feedback from people. And so it could just be whatever I want, whatever Mark, the CEO, wants, right? It could just be whatever the team want. But it'd be much more interesting if people went and like commented and voted on things they wanted. Because then we can build the best thing for everyone.
For people to do that.
Roadmap.stoplight.io. I'll put a link in the footnotes. But
yep. So if you have features, like I was thinking, a really cool kind of fun, almost like a microsite would be like random custom open API rule sets that we've come across in the wild.
Yeah.
To give people like an idea of like, what are some, like you have like your basic rules, and then here's like rules that other teams have used that may or may not be a good idea. I think that'd be kind of an interesting kind of weekend.
I really want to work on that. I've started putting some together. I've got an organization called on GitHub, again, link in the show notes, but if you go on GitHub /OpenAPI-contrib, there's a repo called Style Guides where I've started to put together some different style guides for different things. There's the APIs you won't hate style guide, which is just going to be like, you don't even need to read the book, just do what the robots tell you, and you'll have a good API. Kind of putting myself out of money there, but that will give you a lot of opinionated rules about how to build a good API. And then there's other rule sets for like FHIR, FIHR, which is the something or other healthcare system. And that has a bunch of rules like, this is non-compliant with that standard. And so I want to create a whole bunch of them and make like a marketplace. They don't all need to be in this repo, but seeing as they can be shared by NPM modules, they could be anywhere. But I'm just going to start off with a whole bunch in that repo to get people kind of thinking about different rule sets or looking at different rules they could make, because it can get a little bit tricky to think beyond, I guess this should be plural and this should be camel case, and into really kind of zany stuff like you need to have like a /health endpoint, and it should follow this kind of RFC for how to provide a health endpoint. Or we noticed that in your example of an error, we noticed that you had this like 200 response that had the word error in it. Is that maybe an error on a 200 code? Do you want to look into fixing that? And so you can really do some quite advanced stuff. And it does involve a lot of JSON path hackery, but you can see some of those examples to get started.
No, that's super cool. I mean, that stuff's useful, especially that whole 200 OK with an error. I think that's pretty much the bane of everyone's existence at this point.
Right.
Outside of trying not to get sick. One other thing I wanted to talk about real fast, open API wise, is now that Postman, the HTTP testing tool, is now a part of the Open API initiative as well. And
yeah,
one cool thing I saw Ken, who you might know as API Evangelist on Twitter or at Ken Lane, he runs both accounts. He's doing I think it's like an open office hours, I think, every Friday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So I think that's UTC -5 or 6 currently, or no, -4, 5, 6, 7, -7 right now. But if you have questions about Open API, things like that, check it out. He's tweeting it. He'll tweet out about it every so often. I plan on joining this Friday just to check it out, see how it goes. But like the more education that's out there, the more people are going to adopt Open API, start adopting the tools, whether it's Stoplight, or Postman, things like that, which makes everyone's lives a little easier. So I just wanted to throw that out there. He's doing it every Friday, I think. So
cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm excited that Postman are getting more into Open API stuff, because the more tools around, like, the better it is for everyone, really. Like, having choice for your Open API editor, it would be ideal. It's been quite stressful with, everybody wants every single feature, and usually different tooling vendors focus on kind of different parts, or, they'll prioritize A versus B, and you get different functionality. But Stoplight's pretty much the only one doing this so far. And so everyone's had a lot of demands, and it's quite hard to do everything that everyone wants. So the more alternatives there are, the better for everyone. I'm also really excited that they're kind of interested in maybe using Spectral, and so like working together with them on this to try and make Spectral become like the thing, so we can all share our rule sets around. Because the last thing that anyone wants is to try and kind of split up, everyone recreate rule sets for different tooling vendors, right? It'd be much better if we could all just work together. So I think a lot of people might think that folks like Kin and myself are like bitter rivals, but we're mates, and we've hung out and had loads of beers, and we love chatting about stuff like this. So I'm really excited for the chance for us all to work together a whole bunch more and like better the API community instead of, fighting or anything.
Yeah, I don't think we're on fights. So Mike, real fast, like, I know you're kind of more in the front end world. Like, is there any kind of cool API kind of related stuff coming out from like the React or the Vue communities? Like anything GraphQL related that might be noteworthy?
Yeah, so a few things worth mentioning, I guess. I attended a virtual talk from a meetup earlier this week. I think it was Monday or Tuesday night. The meetup is called React Adelphia. It's Philadelphia's React-centric sort of meetup group, run by a phenomenal and hilarious cast of characters. Even if you're not interested in React, they are a group of troubadours worth watching. Yeah, there was a talk during that session on how to consume JSON schema within React. And so there's some interesting support coming out for JSON schema in React-based projects, which basically means that I'll call it second-party support for being able to consume a JSON schema description and then spit out React components in a way that React developers are familiar with. So even if they don't really understand what the schema is, they can understand that, like, hey, when we need a date-based input, this thing is going to render and do all that stuff. That's really cool to see. There's also a very interesting product that some friends of mine work on at a company called TakeShape, where they're building a product called Mesh, which takes basically it becomes a provider for Gatsby sites. So it's a aggregator of APIs that gives a Gatsby-friendly read-only GraphQL endpoint for any number of APIs that you consume. So if on your Gatsby site you have some need to consume a dozen APIs or even just a handful of things, they can do that for you without you having to figure out how to wrangle all this stuff into something that's static site generator friendly. Of course, that doesn't shut off your ability to just consume the endpoint dynamically if you need that as well. But in the sake of being efficient and creating SEO friendly stuff, it's really nice and easy to use. Beyond that, I nothing really comes to the front of mind, but I will say that it does seem like from my own observation of the community, there's a lot more React developers who are starting to talk about like thinking about API side of things, and there seems to be a general frustration with one of the downfalls of React is that you tend to create like a state that lives only in your front end application that really probably should just be the state of the database. And it seems like some sort of a revolution is coming where that is going to go away. And so if you've heard things like Redux and Saga and things like that, those are going away. And there's a really great library called React Query from a guy named Tanner Lindsley, I think is his last name. His hashtag that he runs around with is TanStack. He's made a really, really cool tool that actually does all of the smart things that you should do for contacting and using an API. So it does HTTP caching, it does front-end caching, it will go and query APIs in a way where if you're doing like paginated queries, it'll go look up the next page before you need it so that the response seems super real-time. And he is a brilliantly smart guy and is writing software at a rate that I can't possibly comprehend for one person. His tooling is really awesome. So those are all things worth checking out for sure.
That sounds great. Make sure we get a link in the show notes to that because I want to play around with that.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
It looks really awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people kind of say, you know, doing certain things with APIs is hard, so let's dumb down the APIs, whereas really just kind of adding some intelligent clients is kind of a better way to handle things. Like a lot of this pagination and HTTP caching, there's already middlewares out there that people just don't necessarily use. And because they're focusing so closely on the HTTP level, it's like make this request and get this response, and they're looking at the actual JSON and doing this actual stuff. But if you put some kind of middleware logic in there, you can make a really nice experience where the user isn't forced to do so much of that kind of wire JSON messing around and still have great functionality. So that sounds really useful.
Yeah. The developer behind that is one of the few people that I contribute to directly on GitHub because everything that he touches turns to gold. Like he's a really smart guy. He's also starting to do, as I understand it, corporate consulting. So if you want to have him come teach you how to do performant React query work, he will come and do that. So yeah, definitely we'll include some of that in the show notes too.
And you mentioned something cool there too about like joining, was it React to Philadelphia?
Reactadelphia, yeah.
Reactadelphia. Because like a few weeks ago, Phil was talking about API design at PHP South Wales, and I was able to join it from the comfort of my apartment in Nashville, which in a not COVID-19 travel limited world, I would never be able to just zoom in the South Wales area and watch Phil talk about something that I'm interested in. So it's been really cool to see that kind of thing. the darker side of this, though, is obviously like mental health has been struggling for a lot of people. So while this is a bigger conversation and we have time for, just wanted to tell people, like, if you're struggling, if you're not feeling like yourself, it's okay to tell people, it's okay to talk about it. And I highly encourage you to find a therapist. I found one, and I've only done 2 sessions, and honestly, it feels like, it's gonna sound like, if you ever had like a blister on the bottom of your foot, like after walking at like a national park or something, and like you pop in and just feel like it feels so good. Like that's what it's felt like for me. And I know like there's been a few more prominent people talking about this, struggling about this, trying to put words to feelings and things like that. I'm not going to name any names, but if you're clever enough, you can find them on Twitter. But just know that's okay, and we're all struggling. Obviously, it's a bigger conversation than now, but I just wanted to throw that out there as like a thing for, in case someone's like, I should go talk to somebody, this can be the guiding light to getting you onto that path.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a lot of stigma traditionally that's come behind like trying to look for help for yourself, right? Like mental health has typically tended to have a bit of a negative context that comes along with it. And I think that, whoever you are, there's some way to be taking care of yourself. And for a lot of people right now, that may just be taking a day or 2 or 5 of vacation. And like, even if you're stuck at your house, just don't look at work, don't open your email, don't, get on Twitter or whatever impacts you negatively. And
doom scrolling.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's so easy to do.
I'm not
looking for help is a good thing.
But like just not scrolling at night.
Yeah.
It's such a way to like just take weight off your shoulders, because like you keep scrolling and it's like, oh, Phil's biking in Amsterdam. Well, I wish I was biking in Amsterdam. And then like you see the next thing and you're like, oh, they're doing something incredible right now too. And I'm like, well, I'm just laying in bed. And,
right.
Yeah. If you see something good, you feel jealous. If you see something bad, you feel angry. There's not much positivity coming out of that. I mean, obviously, it would be nice if I could look at my friend doing something great and be like, I'm really happy that my friend's doing something great, but it's really hard to not tack on, and I wish I was. It's just, it's not always how the brain works, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, even if you don't identify with kind of having any sort of mental disorder or situation happening, I think even just kind of everyone can have these smaller temporary things where their brain isn't quite doing what it should be. Just things like burnout, for example, for me, regularly mess me up. So I've never been diagnosed as anything, but I feel like incredibly depressed, not necessarily depressed, but just really, really like sad and shitty when I was at WeWork. Like I complained about this a lot, but for like a year and a half or for like the last 6 months specifically, I was just like angry and bitter and just really frustrated and really stressed and just like lashing out at random people on Twitter and just shouting at people for no reason and just being miserable. And finding someone to talk to about that really helped me out. And I think I used one of those online apps, there shouldn't be any stigma about seeking help. If you have really good friends that you can talk to, then maybe that can do it. But a lot of us, unfortunately, have friends that aren't experts, obviously, but also are kind of dicks sometimes when you talk about that stuff. They will give you some friends can give you shitty feedback if you try and talk about like, I feel sad. They'd be like, soldier on, and all that kind of chin up nonsense. So if your friends aren't very supportive or understanding of those sort of situations, then finding someone who is an expert and isn't like that is the best thing to do.
And it's also just like kind of like weird for people to like receive this kind of information, because no one really knows what to do with it. It's if I tell someone I'm depressed, they're gonna kind of be like, well, okay, don't really know what to do there, but so like we have to normalize all that kind of stuff. But it's just like Phil's efforts with going carbon neutral is not going to be an overnight thing. This is not going to be an overnight thing too, but it's good to get the conversation started.
Yeah, I think there's a feeling that often what's best for yourself. And a lot of the times you may, right? Like you'll probably know what makes you feel better for yourself, better than say your friend, your girlfriend, your significant other may. But oftentimes when you're really in the depths of things, and even when you're not, when you don't realize it, is when you need help from someone who's professional. And there are people who are trained in this, who are way better at it than you might realize. It's definitely worth looking into and worth giving a shot. And also, I'll say, giving it a shot more than once. A lot of getting good help is finding someone to talk to who works for you. So, if you have a couple of meetings with someone and you decide they're not right for you, it's definitely like a go seek a second opinion as a normal course of action. You got to find someone who's able to help you, and it's a completely normal behavior and definitely a good thing to do.
Definitely. And I think people are going to appreciate us even just starting to talk this up. But Mike, I know you got a meeting to go to. Zoom's yelling at me. So I think we're going to wrap this one up. I think it was great talking to you guys. Phil, try not to die in between now and the next one. It'd be great.
I can't make any promises. My fixie doesn't have a saddle on it right now, and I've been cycling it flip-flops. So something's going to go wrong at some point.
Attaboy.
There you go. Real fast, if you want to get in on the Phil death pool, just send me a tweet and I'll send you the spreadsheet. Thanks, guys.
All right, take it easy, guys.